So very quickly about myself and my organization. So I am the founder of IORA Ecological Solutions, which is a Delhi-based organization which has been working on land restoration, forest conservation, and community resilience projects for the last 12 years. We work across project implementation, project financing, and also policy. We've supported the government of India on developing a roadmap for its Paris Agreement land-based goal, for its bond challenge land-based goal, so on and so forth. We've also been involved in developing early methodologies for the carbon market, including writing the only land-based methodology for India. We've been part of the VCMI, the Verified Carbon Market Integrity Initiative, and the Biodiversity Credit Collaborative, trying to develop new methodologies which can unlock financing for nature and smallholders. So that's what we do. We have a team of about 100 people with expertise across ecology, agriculture science, community engagement, behavior change, as finance, and then remote sensing and GIS and its application. So I'm going to talk a little bit about, and personally, my background, I'm a forester by training, and before that, I was a GIS scientist, and then I have a keen interest in exploring and using my background, which was as a carbon fund manager for many years. I used to lead Ecosecurities, which was a well-known carbon fund back in the day for South Asia, and then AES, which is a power company. They had a climate investment fund for South Asia and Middle East. So my key interest is to use personally my financing and technology background and put that together with the right community approaches to unlock financing at scale for restoration. We focus on restoration at a landscape level. So we try and prioritize sourcing carbon investment and other investments into vulnerable landscapes, either from a human dependency or from a biodiversity perspective, and then try and solve these at scale. So it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much. We are also working closely with Rabobank on a project that I'm going to actually present today as an example of how we are trying to use the carbon markets to unlock financing for communities. Very quick background, I think for India, I'm sure all of you are already aware of many of these facts, but just to emphasize why programs like this are very critical for India. India has seen rising temperatures. Last year, we had an average temperature of higher than 0.7% as compared to the last decade. Our monsoon has become very skewed. In the last 1 month, Delhi has seen 52 degrees as the highest temperature, and then we've got the 3 months of rainfall in 1 week. So in a month, the capital of India has been burning at 52 degrees and has had urban flash floods. So is the case for large parts of the country. We are extremely vulnerable given our very high population and our direct dependence on nature. We have for many, many centuries been protected by the challenges of the global economy, global vagaries, etc., because nature is abundant. India is the only country in the world which has all agroecological zones that you see anywhere else. So any plant or any animal can find a home here. But with climate change and threats related to climate change, this whole order is under threat. These are some news clippings which show the extent of how much urban flooding, rural flooding, and droughts have increased in the country. And this is very pronounced in the area that we are doing this project. I'm actually calling in from there. I'm sitting right now in Meghalaya, which is part of the northeastern biodiversity hotspot. But these trends are even more pronounced here. Meghalaya falls in one of the top 3 most vulnerable states in the country because of all of these factors. So community-based approaches from our perspective are very critical to combat climate change, both from a mitigation and adaptation lens. Firstly, because they have inherent co-benefits. Any investments in nature-based mitigation and community essentially builds resilience of both the community and ecology. And we've also, as many of us know, and we've experienced firsthand, that by healthy community participation and by including community knowledge and attitudes, we are able to build programs which are much more long-term, which are much more successful. And I think that using carbon finance in such a manner that it can lead to this collaboration and help monitor it effectively has many, many advantages. So successful community-based projects must be participatory, must incorporate indigenous knowledge, and must involve communities as decision makers. This is our philosophy, and this is the premise based on which we're designing the program that I'm going to present to you. Now, our program seeks to leverage the carbon market. India has been an early mover in the carbon market, as we all know. We are actually hosting now one of the largest numbers of voluntary carbon projects and the highest growth rate probably after the US. India has a strong experience in the carbon markets. We were one of the front runners when it came to CDM, but very little of that earlier investment went into nature. Now, of course, there's a huge focus on nature. both agriculture and forestry. And this is what we seek to leverage. And this is where we are kind of operating on. So how is carbon finance a key enabler for community resilience? It can invest in creating a market for ecosystem services that our forest communities have delivered for a millennia, but have never been paid for. It's like internalizing an externality of nature that also compensates the housekeepers, the people who are safeguarding those ecosystem services, but are not really fairly compensated. And as a result, stay at the bottom of the pyramid when it comes to economic growth. We feel, of course, that this is just the first instrument, and there is a long more way to go with many other instruments that need to be developed. So coming to our program now, that I'd like to use as a case study to explain our approach. It's called the Meghalaya Carbon Agroforestry for Community Resilience and Ecosystems. We abbreviate it as MEGCARE. The program operates in the northeastern state of Meghalaya, like I mentioned. Meghalaya is nestled below the eastern Himalayas. It's a part of the Northeast India biodiversity hotspot, one of the most diverse ecologies in India. Even now, almost every 6 months, if you Google, you'll see that there are at least 20 to 25 new species of amphibians or fishes or even birds found in this state. That's how rich it is. Another fun fact about two other interesting facts about Meghalaya are that it's the origin of citrus. So all citrus plants that all of us eat, all citrus fruit originated in Meghalaya in a sanctuary called Utrecht. And the current era, the current geological epoch that we are all living in is called the Meghalayan epoch, because the evidence for this was found in a cave in Meghalaya. So relatively well known amongst some circles, but major contributor to some interesting things in the world. So why are we focusing on this state? The state is vulnerable because of years of shifting cultivation and slash and burn. A large part of the state's forests are degraded or are degrading. The state is also unique in the sense that there is a special provision in the Constitution of India where it's one of the few or one of the only two states where the entire forest is owned by communities. So there is legal title and tenure that the communities have on the forest. They just don't have access but ownership. Which is also the reason why there is such large amount of slash and burn. Communities have a strong dependence and affinity to nature. We've experienced this in the last few years that we've been working here, that there is obviously a need for monetary compensation, but even without that, with just a few enabling factors, the tribal community here likes to invest in forest growth because they just have this cultural affinity. This is one of the last remaining states which has a very large number of sacred groves, because the communities here believe that their ancestors lie in these groves, and those sacred groves are very, very well preserved. In fact, they are one of the highest reserves of biodiversity. Those are the groves where they keep finding new species. But because of the overall degradation in the non-sacred grove areas, there has been a huge impact on the livelihoods of communities. Nutrition levels are dropping, and very importantly, springs are drying. Because it's a completely hilly state, they are very dependent on their water springs, and 54% of all springs have dried already, and another 40% are under the threat of drying. So as a result of that, the government here and the community organizations, because they have very strong local indigenous institutions which govern the land, have very seriously started considering and working in the last 4 to 5 years on strengthening nature-based solutions towards water conservation and reforestation. So they've done a lot of pilots. They've received support from external agencies, but now they are very, very keen to scale up. One other interesting fact is that this is the only state in India which is completely matrilinear. So all institutions and all land is actually owned by the women, and the land and property is passed to the youngest daughter of the owner. So it's matrilinear. All decision making is done by women, which we've also experienced actually helps us, because the decision making we've seen as compared to other states is more in favor of conservation of ancestral property, or more likely to be. So these are our goals. Our goal is to restore 150,000 hectares of community-owned forest here, or community-owned land here, through agroforestry approaches in such a way that there is income for the communities from carbon, from produce of the land, and there is long-term locking in of carbon stocks. Also, soil conservation, avoidance of runoff, and general restoration. So this program is now being implemented as a partnership with Rabobank Econ. I heard that there are some colleagues from Econ in the room. So, and then with the Meghalaya government, there is a body here called the Basin Development Authority. Interesting to note that we chose, and the government chose our partner to be the Basin Development Authority and not the Forest Department, because they see that the criticality here is to conserve forests to conserve the river basins. So these are our long-term goals of this program. What we've agreed on is that we are not only going to use this as a means for income from carbon, but as a key enabler of a green economy. So the long-term goals of the overall program are reforestation and afforestation, but using that to also kick off approaches towards natural farming, huge capacity building, livelihoods, and creating green value chains. We are also getting now financial support increasingly from the government that wherever we do large-scale agroforestry, they invest in processing of agroforestry produce, which are sustainably harvested, and overall enhancing the economic resilience of the state, but in a green manner. The state has also recently commissioned a whole project on creating a green budget and sort of a green economic reporting. So they're actually doing a parallel green sort of a valuation of ecosystem service side reporting next to their GDP to show how the natural stocks of the state are growing. And our program is one of the key programs which they expect will feed into enhancement of those green budgets and green GDP. So community at the center, our key constituents are community. They are the owners of the land and the decision makers. We are developed about close to about 13 agroforestry designs. So the whole model is that we work with communities to identify patterns of local native trees and combinations along with some annual crops that we then disseminate widely. We get communities to adopt those. These are developed with them, and now we expect them to adopt those, implement those, and over a period of 30 years, reward them with carbon finance and all the other capacity building and institutional development. We are also obviously very lucky to partner with Rabobank, whose model is something that we ascribe to. Both us and Rabobank feel very strongly that a very large share of the benefits should go to communities. So as part of ECON, there is a mandate that 80% of all carbon benefits go to communities, which is, again, one of the cornerstones of the project to ensure that the owners of the land get the most benefit out of the conservation work that they're doing. Although this is logical, but I must mention that this is not the default market practice. There are many other organizations where this sometimes can be the opposite, that communities get 20% and intermediaries get 80%, and we feel that that's unethical, B, also strategically wrong because you're not incentivizing people enough for permanence. The high price of the cruise ensures also that there is value. And then
hold on, you still have 1 minute in the presentation, so if you could go fast.
I'll wrap up. So these are the two. We have a couple of models here. One is that we onboard farmers. We've done in the last 6 months, we've created a team and engaged with close to about I would say 10,000 farmers and disseminated a program to them. And out of that, we at the moment have onboarded through a series of multi-tier presentations and meetings about close to about 6,000 of them. And we have about 7,500 hectares onboarded on our program. These are the prominent agroforestry designs: citrus fruits, local, with fodder grass, hardwood trees. They have a local pinus species of their own. Then some local fruit trees. They have their own variety of pineapple. And then finally, shade trees for the local coffee. So these are some models that we have designed that I mentioned. Similar models. They have two broad different ecoregions. So we've designed models for both of them. As you can see, it's all a combination of some timber trees and some horticulture trees. This is the farmers onboarded. So this is the long-term impact that we're envisioning of the program. One is higher income, revival of springs, avoidance of soil runoff, which is a major issue, resilience for the communities, reduced burning of the land, and then finally, supply of organic, high-quality forest produce, which is processed locally and is supplied to the rest of the country. Lastly, contribute towards the overall economic growth of the state as well, and capacity of their youth who at the moment are struggling to find the right jobs and are migrating at scale. I'll stop there.
A quick introduction. So as I founded Solidaridad in Asia region some 17 years back, now together with around 700 colleagues, we are creating sustainable supply chains supporting around 12 million smallholders, 2 million smallholders in around 9 countries. And I'm an economist by training. With last 24 years, I've only worked on sustainability. Main motivation has been to create fair and inclusive development for smallholders and workers in agriculture. So that's me. My presentation is going to be slightly different. I would have basically 3 components to it. The first component is the question about addressing this issue about why should we have fair and inclusive, carbon in the first place. What does it mean? The second part is what are the challenges smallholders are facing in terms of carbon? And third is related to what could be potential solutions. So to start with, in this decade, we are witnessing a significant transformation on how different stakeholders are engaging with the concept of sustainability. When we were starting with sustainability, the issues used to be very different. But now there is a clear shift towards integrating carbon management as a cornerstone of sustainability strategies for businesses, governments, and even civil society organizations like ours. And this change, we can understand, is driven by several regulatory mandates like European carbon tax, voluntary commitments like net zero by 2050, and also probably the concerns about negative business impact of climate change. Now, these commitments are achieved through insetting and offsetting. I'm an economist, it's a bit sometimes difficult to understand this, but what I understand is offsetting is achieved by paying someone else to compensate for a company's emission through, for example, tree planting. And insetting is actively reducing emission within your supply chain. So let me start with the first part now, having worked out this, why it is necessary to address the inclusivity of carbon markets. And we should begin with why it should be inclusive and why there are disproportionate responsibilities and accountability between global north and global south. So in order to examine this why, let us have to go back a history for a couple of minutes. The first aspect of that could be explained in the form of something called atmospheric commons. The atmospheric commons are referring to shared global resources of the Earth's atmosphere, which all nations rely on maintaining climate stability and supporting life. Developed nations have utilized substantial portion of this available carbon budget, leaving rest room for developing countries to grow their economies without exceeding the safe planetary boundaries. This is a dilemma you face. Now, let me give you an example. United States, with just over 4% of the global population, has historically contributed around 25% of cumulative carbon emissions. The European Union, with 6% of global population, accounts for roughly 22% of historical emissions. In contrast, now if you look at India and Africa combined, represent over a third of global population, has contributed less than 8% of historical emission. That's one dilemma you see. The second aspect is the last 2 decades, global north has outsourced carbon emissions by moving dirty industry and waste to global south. Now, large parts of global south is dedicated to remove carbon for offsetting the impact on the environment. In most cases, it is about moving the business sustainability impacts, somehow adjusted through environmental accountancy. For example, the entire European Union has reduced carbon emission by 27%. But, and this is for the last few decades, but if we take into account what Europe as a society consumes rather than what they produce within their borders, we'll see an 11% increase in emissions since 1990. Of course, Europe is taking a lot of steps through green legislation, but then that is another issue because it brings other challenges of inclusion. Now, having shared the fundamental reasons why for the need for an inclusive carbon market and differentiated responsibilities, let us look at how these processes are impacting smallholders in the global south. What I see in my work in most of the places we see that, and what we read, there are a lot of land displacement and loss of livelihood is also happening. Smallholders often face displacement as their lands are acquired for large-scale afforestation and reforestation projects under carbon offsetting schemes. In countries like Indonesia, where I'm sitting right now, there is a huge expansion of carbon offsetting projects that has led to conversion of agricultural land into forest plantations. This displacement is forcing farmers to leave their ancestral lands. So that's one of the problems which we see. The second issue we are seeing is inequitable financial benefits. Because financial benefit from carbon offsetting projects are rarely reaching smallholders. There are exceptions, like programs like Acorn. But there are many cases where business case for agroforestry by smallholder, particularly in Asia, who are less than 1 hectare in average, is hardly visible. As a result, small farmers planting trees for carbon credits rarely see the money. Either the broker takes away the lion's share, or it is taken away by the government as taxes. Carbon is not tax-free. In Indonesia, there is 40% taxes on it. There is no such tax waiver for carbon. Third is the marginalization of farmers in the carbon credit system. There are expensive audit agencies and so-called carbon experts are establishing complex rules for carbon standards, audits, and pricing. These farmers are left on the sidelines. If we are developing a carbon credit or carbon rule for the farmers, it should be inclusive of them. Even the civil society organizations have, in many cases, have been sidelined, and confining this discourse to a circle of scientists, technocrats, and expensive verification agencies. This exclusion not only marginalizes the very communities we are striving to uplift, but also jeopardizes the integrity and inclusivity of sustainable development. In the case of carbon insetting, there are companies within their own supply chains. There is a risk of smallholder farmers being excluded from the supply chain as the company seeks to meet their carbon reduction targets. This is also further compounded by emphasis on traceability and certification, which can be administratively burdensome and also expensive. So what are the way forward quickly? I think it is very crucial to, this is the third part, we need to implement transparent pricing mechanism to create a fair and farmer inclusive carbon market. There has to be absolute clarity about how the pricing is developed, how the carbon that rewards the true value of carbon sequestration efforts and the cost incurred by the farmers. So this should include covering certification costs and providing financial incentives to make carbon farming viable and attractive. Second, promote farmer participation and representation. Today, there is very little partnership or active participation of farmers in carbon market governance. The approach is not only promote sustainable development if we do that, but also addresses economic equity. Third, the carbon measurement and verification system should be made simplified and make them more accessible and affordable for farmers. This can be achieved by developing simplified methodologies that reduce administrative burden and cost. This will make it more farmer friendly, and we can get more broader participation and compliance. Fourth, develop farmer-led standards. The standards should not be coming from top, telling the farmers, once again, we did it in 2001 and 2002. Around that time, we created several sustainability standards, and we went to the farmers and said, hey, guys, you have to implement these standards. This is good for you. Now, we are having second thoughts. There are several studies, including by Wageningen and many others universities, showing the business case was not clear. These farmers have many traditional knowledges and practices. This could help developing the standards in an inclusive way with the farmers. It will also reflect the realities of the smallholder farming. Farmer-led standards can bridge the gap between global carbon markets and local agricultural practices, fostering a more inclusive and effective system. Fifth, establish direct benefit sharing mechanisms. Something like Acorn has done. This is a very good example. And ensure that the middlemen and several other organizations which are sprouting like we have never seen before in the last few decades, does not make it their livelihood option while leaving the farmers behind in this system. And lastly, and very importantly, we have to address the price paradox. The current system, which pays higher prices for carbon credits while squeezing small farmers on commodity prices, creates that paradox. It undermines sustainability. So, for example, you can have a very good rate on carbon from tea farming. But if you are creating a system where the tea commodity prices are so low, it kind of negates the whole process. To address this, we need to ensure, and there's no compromise on receiving a living income or living wage in the commodity chains where we are working. This will support long-term viability of agricultural practices by aligning carbon credit prices with fair commodity prices. We can create more balanced and sustainable system. So in conclusion, I would say, as we different stakeholders increasingly view carbon management as a cornerstone of sustainability, it is crucial to consider the impacts on smallholders thoughtfully. By creating supportive frameworks, ensuring fair compensation, and also fostering inclusive participation, we can turn the challenge of carbon reduction into an opportunity for sustainable development. This approach will not only benefit the environment, but also support the livelihood of smallholder farmers, ensuring that they are integral and valued participants in this global shift towards sustainability. Thank you very much.